So again, welcome to the URI College of the Environment and Life Sciences and to the URI Cooperative Extension Educational Webinar Series, Learn at Home. Thank you for coming to the Valuing Siting Options for Commercial Scale Solar Energy in Rhode Island with Kate Venturini and Dr. Corey Lang. Again, we're so glad you're joining us. And Kate, if you could just switch to the next slide. The University of Rhode Island is the state's land-grant institution, which means it has a three-pronged mission: teaching, research, and extension. Cooperative Extension is the arm of the university that brings science-based resources to the public and exists in every state in the U.S. We focus on 5 strategic areas of focus, extending information through outreach programs about land stewardship, food systems and agriculture, water resources, healthy lifestyles, and energy literacy, which is the branch we'll be focused on today. Next slide, Kate. We are pleased to offer this series via webinar, as URI Cooperative Extension is committed to helping all Rhode Islanders improve quality of life, livelihoods, and the health of the environment. Please help us ensure that we are reaching all who might benefit from this information by sharing our webpage and social media profiles with your friends, family, and personal and professional networks. Next slide, Kate. And just a few housekeeping points before we jump into discussing the project with you all. First, there is a Q&A function to this webinar, so feel free to answer or put in your questions and we'll try to answer them as best as possible. And also, if you want to reach this webinar or any of the other webinars that are part of the Learn at Home series after this is ended, feel free to go to our YouTube channel, URI Cooperative Extension, and you can reach them there. And with that, I will now hand it over to Kate Venturini, our Extension Educator here at URI.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, Molly? All right.
I can hear you.
Great. We love technology. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I am reporting live today from my office at URI, which feels great. And I am going to start us off, and then I will pass the baton to Dr. Lang, who will talk to you all about the research components of this project. So we're going to start off. I'm going to give a bit of local context for everyone, which I view as really the justification for this study and the reason why Corey went to USDA and proposed this project. I will also lay out the foundation for the project that I am helping him with in cooperation also with Molly and Vasu, who is on the call today. So we're going to kind of lay out what our first 3 activities are and then talk about what our next steps are. And once that is all done, you all hopefully will have entered lots of great questions in the Q&A that are relevant to what we've talked about, or just other questions relevant to solar siting in Rhode Island. And we will attempt to answer them all. I would say, and I'll say this again at the end, if there is anything that folks ask that we aren't able to answer, we will happily follow up via email. We really appreciate everyone for being here. So to start, hopefully this is a review for many of you. We could spend many hours talking about our generation's challenge in making sure that we can keep the lights on, protect the environment, and keep people cool or warm. But I just wanted to set the stage and kind of frame this issue in terms of the place we're in, the policy that we have, and the players involved. And I would, again, I've chosen to highlight some of this information because I think it's interesting to the issue of solar siting in Rhode Island in particular, and this will make more sense once we go through. So if you just point your attention to the yellow and kind of bright blue colors from 2016 forward, you can see that non-residential and utility scale solar installations are exponentially growing. And in many ways, that's a really great thing. We have, according to the Solar Association, I'll give you a citation at the end here in the chat box, but we have 12 installers and developers actively working in Rhode Island and bringing millions of dollars here. And so this is a really wonderful thing. In terms of where we're at, this GIS image is showing the forest blocks that exist in the state, mostly west of the I-90, northwest of the I-95 corridor. So out of the 1,212 square miles of beautiful land we have in Rhode Island, that is equal to over 775,000 total acres. And what is really interesting, and again, what some of the justification for this study is that 56% of this land, it's precious land that we have in Rhode Island, about 435,000 acres of it is forested. If I draw your attention to that pie chart, there, out of that 435,000 acres, 68% of it is privately owned. And the reason I bring this up is because, as we all know, we can do with our land what we want. And so what we're seeing in Rhode Island is development proposals in forested areas. We're also seeing them on agricultural lands. 77,000 acres of our state is farm or agricultural land. And so there's a lot of opportunity. And Corey will talk more about our objectives specific to these particular land types, and also what our objectives are not. So I'll leave that there for him. So picture's a little pixelated, but on January 17th, 2020, our governor signed an executive order number 20-01, and that executive order stated that we shall procure 100% of our electricity demand from renewable energy sources by 2030. So this is an ambitious goal, a progressive goal, especially as we start to electrify heating sources and other forms of energy. And so this is going to mean that we really need to start looking forward at renewable sources, one of which includes solar. So this is one of the policy contexts that we draw your attention to. The other one is that back in 2017, 2018, there was a group of stakeholders that were led by the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, which many of you know is our state planning agency. And we also have a division of statewide planning, a division of which is Land Use Office. They led a process by which stakeholders came to a table and put together some, what we're calling statewide solar siting guidance. Again, as I said, there was a very active stakeholder process, and there was input collected from state and local officials. So that could include folks at the energy office at the state level, also municipal planners, other folks from planning boards or town councils, developers were involved, businesses and utilities, of which we have 3 in Rhode Island. 3 utilities, that is, non-governmental organizations, some residents, and some property owners. And what I wanted to point out here is that the siting guidance is somewhat voluntary in that it actually states that nothing in the guidance should supersede or diminish any authority that a municipality has. In other words, what municipalities, what towns and cities do to promote solar siting or to manage solar siting or dictate what's happening around solar siting in their city and town is up to them. And so this statewide solar siting guidance was created to provide a framework or kind of a compass, if you will, for municipalities. And they were either, to kind of adopt the guidance through ordinance and comprehensive plans, or create something of their own. And so That said, in Rhode Island, many of you know, we have 39 municipalities, each with their own comprehensive plan, which guides development decisions and lots of other things that happen at the city and town, the local level. So one of the questions, when we looked at this, kind of framing our own project, was, is each town approaching the solar siting issue differently? Are folks at the city and town level adopting the siting guidance kind of wholesale? And if they are or if they aren't, are they under pressure to approve solar development on undisturbed lands in particular, which we consider farms and forested open space, where we know development may be less expensive? And we'll get into that a little bit. And so when we were asking ourselves these questions and doing our needs assessment, which I'll talk about in a moment, one of the questions that came up was, what are the residents in these communities and in all communities in Rhode Island prefer? Where would they like to see renewable development? Because we have a goal of procuring 100% of our electricity from renewable sources. So kind of to sum all that up, we have, again, if I just go back to this image, we have a very unique situation in Rhode Island because we don't have a lot of lands, but we have a very ambitious, progressive, and necessary policy goal to procure 100% of our electricity in the next 10 years from renewable sources. And we have a lot of players who are interested in the decisions that are made around solar siting. And that's really, the players are where we're focusing our attention for this project. And so what's really exciting to me as an extension professional here in Rhode Island, in a state where we do not have big agriculture, but we have very unique problems that can be solved by science. I'm excited to be part of this project with my partner in crime, Molly Perkins, who's an energy fellow, interested in an energy career. We are part of this integrated team. And so Dr. Lang and his PhD student, Vasu, are kind of responsible for the research elements of this project, which are really exciting and really interesting, and they'll share those in a moment. But it's, Extension's objective through this project to not only set the stage and kind of explain the justification for it, but also to say, what do we need research? What questions are there that we need answered? And then here are our research results. And we hope that through engagement with our stakeholders through this project, we're able to answer some of those questions. So it's, at USDA, they call these projects integrated. It's a combination of research and extension as the outreach arm bookends the research. And really the point of this is to make sure that the research gets out to the people that need it directly through the project. So I can't tell you how exciting it is for us to dig into a real issue that could use a little bit of non-market valuation, which Corey will explain. So that said, I will kind of lay out what we're doing. And this is, I will just say, year 2 of a 3-year project. So we kind of took the first year to bring Molly on board to frame some of these studies that Corey will explain to you all, and really to kind of get our feet deeply rooted in the issue and how our research and extension can help, specifically with solar siting challenges. And so there's kind of, we see 5 parts or five objectives to this project. The first being the needs assessment, and that is what Molly and I have been working on. And really this is the framing part of the project. So these, just some of the questions we've asked ourselves are, how are solar siting decisions made now, specifically at the local level, and what's considered at that level? And also, are these decisions potentially reflective of resident preferences? That question is a complicated one because we actually found that the choice survey that Corey will talk about is a necessary tool in figuring out if the decisions that are made around solar siting are reflective of resident preferences. We don't really know that yet. And so what Molly and I have done, and I'll talk about this in a moment, is kind of taken a three-prong approach to a needs assessment through 3 different activities. So I'll hold that there. The second part, which Corey will talk about, is a housing market study, looking at whether or not solar development impacts housing prices and the choices people make when they are shopping for property. The other research tool we have is really interesting and gets at the non-market valuation goals we have, and that is how people, really residents value various attributes of solar arrays, and those are commercial scale solar arrays. And with the results of these 2 studies, we are, kind of as our 4th objective, going to share our research results with our stakeholders and see if the results kind of reshape how we approach solar siting in Rhode Island based on the kind of place, policy, and player situation we're in. And lastly, as is common with all extension projects, one of the things we're very proud of is that we really strive to measure the impact that these types of programs and projects have on the issue at hand. And so we're going to ask ourselves, did our work have an impact on policy as it relates to resident preference? Hopefully we'll find out that it did. So just to kind of frame again our extension and outreach objectives, we wanted to determine through our needs assessment where knowledge gaps exist amongst our primary stakeholders in particular. Knowledge gaps is kind of a weird phrase, but it's really, another way to think of it is, do folks in decision-making positions have all the information they need to make decisions that help everyone? And so when we say primary stakeholders, we're really focused in on policymakers, both at the state level and at the local level, as I mentioned before. Our other objective is to make sure that we're disseminating the results of the research that Dr. Lang and Vasu do through workshops and events like this one. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to come together in person, but and then the third thing, as I said, is evaluating the effectiveness of this project on solar siting policy in Rhode Island, which is a really big part of what our work is focused on. So like I mentioned, before I hand it over to Corey, I just wanted to give you a sense, and you kind of have to tilt your head a little bit to see this, but our needs assessment kind of spanned 3 activities, one of which is that it was really important for us to do just some literature review and background research around existing policies and also those that were introduced and didn't make it through the legislature in Rhode Island. And, what were some of the considerations for siting in rural and suburban communities that some of these bills attempted to address and those that they didn't, and kind of just asking these types of questions and learning about the state of things so that we could then figure out what questions we needed to be asking our primary and secondary stakeholders. So the second part of our needs assessment was doing personal interviews, and I think Molly can correct me, but we're up towards around 15 interviews now, and we're really appreciative of all of the state officials, municipal planners, and also non-governmental organization experts and business development experts who took the time to allow us to ask them questions, some of which were tough and others that really enlightened us, because these personal interviews were incredibly enlightening. And so if anyone's interested in hearing or seeing who we interviewed, we'd be happy to provide that information via our website, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. And then lastly, and I should mention all of these things happened in tandem, pre and post pandemic, we attended a number of zoning board, planning board, and town council meetings, sat quietly and ferociously took notes in communities including West Greenwich, Hopkinton, Middletown, Woonsocket, and North Smithfield, where there were proposals for solar development, commercial scale solar on the table. And so again, you know, doing all of these things really helped us frame the issue, and it allowed us to have great conversations with Corey and Vasu about how we might frame our research tools. So with that, I hope you all ask me lots of tough questions at the end of this, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Lang, who will explain his fascinating economic research to you all. Corey, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Can you hear me? Oh, good on microphone? Great. So first off, thank you all so much for taking an hour out of your time on this Friday to hear what we have to say and for us to share with you. So my name is Corey Lang. I'm an associate professor at URI. I've been here about 9 years, and I'm a resource economist. I got interested in solar siting debate about, it's over 2 years ago now, and I found it fascinating. It's really the first time I've witnessed a debate that has environmentalists on both sides, right? Often it's environmentalists versus developers, or that's the common trope. But here you have two groups of people that really care about the environment that are still at odds with how this should proceed. So I find that a fascinating debate, and I felt that some economic research could be useful in helping people navigate this complex issue. And so that's why I got interested in, and why I recruited Kate, and we wrote a grant together to study this. So the core research really has these objectives, which is to understand and estimate people's preferences about solar siting. And then once we understand those preferences, to encourage policymakers to incorporate preference estimates into decision making. And I want to make it really clear that our objective is not to encourage or discourage solar development. It's also not to encourage or discourage it in certain types of land, right? We don't have that kind of agenda. Our agenda is really just to understand what people want and try to quantify that information, quantify those preferences, and allow policymakers to work with them. All right, next slide. So there's a lot of money involved in solar development, okay? The developers are making money through RECs and spending a lot of money for land rights, or to rent land. Landowners can make a lot of money, and towns can make a lot of tax revenue, okay? So there's a fair bit of money involved in the solar market. And that's great, but what's often missing is the discussion of non-monetary impacts of solar development, okay? And, first and the easiest to think about is reduce carbon emissions. That's really the impetus for Rhode Island and other states incentivizing solar development, mandating renewables, is to reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality. But also involved in solar development is a loss of farmland, a loss of forested land, an industrialization of a rural landscape, and some water quality impacts or increased runoff. And none of these impacts have monetary value, right? But that doesn't mean they're not important. And that's really a key insight, is that just because something doesn't have a monetary value, when you lose a rural landscape, that's not a monetary impact, but it still has a lot of meaning for us. Okay? And so our goal, let's go to the next slide. The goal is to bring these non-monetary impacts into decision-making, because if solar siting decisions ignore non-monetary impacts, they'll be suboptimal from a societal perspective, okay? We want to incorporate both monetary and non-monetary impacts. We care about jobs, we care about profits for sure, that's part of the economy, but we also want to incorporate these environmental impacts and put them on a level playing field of those standard economic impacts, okay? And so the goal of the economic research, back a slide, Kate. The goal of the economic research is to estimate the dollar value of these impacts so that we can put them onto the level playing field. Okay. See why you advance the slide. Sort of segment. All right. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to conduct 2 non-market valuation studies. What does that mean? What does non-market valuation mean? Well, non-market means goods and services that can't be bought or sold in a normal marketplace, right? Classic examples of non-market goods are air quality, water quality, and open space. And there are many of these. Valuation means putting a monetary value on something. And the insight of non-market valuation is that just because certain things can't be bought or sold in a standard marketplace doesn't mean people don't value them, right? When I go to Shaw's, I can't buy a bike path. Right? That's ridiculous. Doesn't mean I don't value it. Doesn't mean I don't make other decisions about where to live or how to spend my time just because I can't buy that bike path. And yeah, so got lost in thought there. But by studying choices, right? By studying choices that people make and trade-offs that they make, we can estimate that value. When it comes to me enjoying bike paths, I chose to live in a house that's near a bike path. And so that's a choice I made and trade-offs that I made so that I can enjoy that value. Next slide. Okay, so 2 studies, 2 non-market valuation studies. First one is a housing market study. And there are these 2 sort of dual objectives with the housing market study. And the first is to assess if property value declines when solar installation is built nearby. Now, this is really important for homeowners. If you own a home, and this is most often for most people, this is their largest asset, their largest source of wealth. And so if that source of wealth declines, that's a really big deal. Okay? And so we need to understand the housing market impacts of solar development because it's important for people's well-being and how well off they are. Okay? Second, we can use the housing market to estimate the willingness to pay to avoid living near a solar installation. Okay, so when people are shopping for houses, they're looking at different properties with different attributes, and they can say, well, this one is near a solar site, this one is not. What am I willing to pay to live near this or to live in the house that is not near the solar? And so we can estimate that empirically and get the willingness to pay from it. And this, is really important for determining the benefits and costs of solar development. Putting that this is an external cost imposed on nearby residents from the solar development. It's outside the market transaction between the developer, the state, and the landowner. Next slide. So the intuition here is pretty clear behind housing market studies. I alluded to it just a second ago, but people choose which house to buy based on many factors. They care about structural attributes like bedrooms, bathrooms, a garage. They care about neighborhood attributes like school quality and parks. They care about environmental attributes, water views, forests, etc. And of course, they care about cost, right? And so people want more of the good things. They want more bedrooms, they want better schools, they want water views, but they need to make trade-offs because of cost, okay? And so by observing people's choices in the market as they make those trade-offs, which house they choose to buy, at what price and what attributes that has, we can infer the value of those individual attributes. Next slide. All right, so this is a little bit reiterating what I just said. So the method is to develop a statistical model to estimate the value of the individual attributes, right? So we can estimate the value of a bedroom, we can estimate the value of additional square foot of living area, or an additional square foot of lot size. Now, we can do that. What we're really interested in is proximity to solar arrays. But that's the basic method. This is a frequently used, highly regarded method in economics. It's been, I mean, literally thousands of studies have used the housing market in this way to infer preferences based on housing market choices. For this study, we're going to be using solar installations and housing transactions in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Now, a lot of the focus of this grant is Rhode Island, and that's, you know, the stakeholders who we're talking about and the policymakers, but including Massachusetts significantly expands the sample size. Massachusetts is a fairly similar state, but they got into solar development before Rhode Island, and so there's substantially more solar developments and more housing transactions in proximity to solar developments. Next slide. So here we have a map of all solar installations in Rhode Island and Massachusetts through August of 2019. And these are all with capacity of 1 megawatt or greater, what we would consider utility scale solar. Okay, so as you can see, Massachusetts has far more, it's a bigger state, but it has far more installations. So that's really going to help us estimate that effect. And they're fairly widespread, right? So we see solar developments in most parts of the state, all over in, you know, suburban areas and rural areas, and that's going to help us do investigation. Next slide. Here we just see the time trends of development. So the first solar installation happened in Massachusetts in 2010. That's when it came online. Things ramped up through 2014 and then took a dip and then hit another high in 2017 and then have tapered off a little bit. Again, this is through August of 2019. So, you know, we have some good time variation estimating these effects. Next slide. So this slide I'm very happy with. So we have done some preliminary work in GIS with the housing transactions and the solar arrays, and we've looked at how many transactions we have that are proximate to different solar arrays. And this is a bar chart, which shows how many transactions we have at different distance bins. So the very first one, 0 to 0.25, that means that within a quarter mile of a solar installation, we have about 4,000 transactions. That's a huge number. That's great. In all, we have over 400,000 housing transactions within 3 miles of a solar array. That's an awesome number, and I feel really happy with that. I think we're going to get precise estimates because of that. And we're going to be able to dig into some detail and look at heterogeneity. But just having this many transactions enables a much better analysis. Next slide. Yeah, so I basically have said this before, but the results of the housing market study will assess whether property values change when solar is built nearby. So we're going to be looking at before and after to assess change. Okay? We're also going to explore whether prior land use, and this is obviously a key thing in the debate of solar siting, is land use, whether it's built on farmland or forest land or capped landfill or a brownfield. And so we're going to try and put that into the property value study to see if there are different effects depending on what the prior land use was. That'll also be important for thinking about policy. Next slide. All right. Last slide here on the housing market study. You know, the big advantage to this research is we're using real market decisions. There is real money on the table when someone buys a house. You can't fake an opinion when you're buying a house, right? This is a huge investment, And if ever there was a time to reveal your true preferences, that is the time. All right. And so that's why it's such a powerful tool in economics and so often used, is because it's a real market decision of such consequence. The disadvantage, however, is that we are fact limited to the types of solar arrays that exist. Right? There is not every permutation of a solar array that could possibly exist that actually does exist. All right. And so because of that, it's useful to policy, but it might not be the only thing that is helpful. Another disadvantage is that residential proximity is just one aspect of possible non-market impacts. There might be a solar array 5 miles from my house, but I still don't like it, or I still wish it was built slightly different. I still wish there was a vegetative buffer, something like that. And so even a non-proximate resident could still have some negative impacts or positive, right? I really like that solar array that's 5 miles from my house. I think it's awesome. I'm really excited about all the energy it is producing, and I'm willing to pay more to have it. Okay? And so the second economic study provides a complement to the first. We're not going to be using real market decisions, but we're able to enhance the variance of solar arrays under consideration and move away from proximity as sort of the one key measure of impact. Okay, next slide. So study number 2, we're going to call a choice survey. And the idea is that we're going to create a survey that presents hypothetical scenarios of solar development with different attributes. And because it's hypothetical, we're able to induce the variation that we want, right? And so the respondent is given these hypothetical scenarios and chooses which development plan or an option of no development that they prefer. And then again, from these choices, we develop a statistical model to estimate the value placed on the different attributes. Okay? And that might be a little unclear, but I think the next slide will help, the next 2 slides. So here's an example. And this is outside of solar, obviously, but consider you wanted to build a new park. And you could survey residents about what kind of attributes they want that park to have. And so this is a sample choice, a hypothetical choice that you could be given in the survey. The attributes are whether or not to have a playground, whether or not to have soccer fields, whether or not to have a parking lot. And then there's a cost. How much does this park cost, say, in additional property taxes? So if I want the playground, it's going to cost $10 more per year. If I want soccer fields and a parking lot, it'll cost $20 more per year. Or there's choice C of no park. So I don't get a playground, I don't get soccer fields, no parking lot, but the cost is 0. And I could weigh these and think about how much I want a playground versus soccer fields, a parking lot, versus how much that money is going to affect my budget, and choose choice A, B, or C. That's the gist of the choice survey, the mechanism. Okay, next slide. But of course, we won't be doing this with park. We'll be doing it with solar attributes. And so what we're going to put into the choice is prior land use again, because we feel that's one of the most important attributes that comes up time and time again in all the meetings we take. We're also going to include size, in terms of megawatts, in terms of acres. We're going to include visibility, and we're going to include setback. We have completed a draft of the survey. We have refined the survey through 6 focus groups, as well as inputs from our advisory group. And we're ready to go. Essentially, we're going to roll this out really soon. We had planned to roll it out sooner, and then COVID-19 hit, and we shelved everything for a while. But we think now is a good time. Okay, next slide. So our sampling strategy to lay out our methods, we're going to use a random sample of Rhode Island residents based on public voter registration records. This will be, the survey will be a combination of mail and online, and we're targeting a sample size of 3,000. that's really the main sample. That's to get a population measure of what people's preferences are, what their willingness to pay is for these various solar siting attributes. But one thing we're really excited about is we also want to survey people who attend events like this. And so you all who are in attendance are going to get an opportunity to take the very survey that I've just been describing. Okay, next slide. So later today, you will receive an email to a survey link to take the choice survey. And this is a great opportunity to not only have your opinions be reflected in the results, but it's also an opportunity to engage with our methods, right? Through taking the survey, you're going to learn more about what we're doing and have a better sense when we come back with results of how we arrived at those results, okay? So some details here, you're going to get this email. It's going to come, the sender will be URI survey. And there's a chance it'll be sent to your spam or promotions folder if you're using Gmail, just because you've never received anything from this sender before. So please check those folders. And just so you know, you can only take the survey once. So this is not a shareable link. It's for you. And once you've taken the survey, you can't take it a second time. But we're really excited, and we really hope you take it. And so thank you in advance for considering taking our survey. Okay. Kate, do you want to talk about the next meeting? Or, I mean.
Sure. So we have another webinar scheduled for Tuesday, September 29th, which is about 6 weeks from now at 7 p.m. And the exciting thing about that webinar is that Corey and Vasu will be reviewing the results of the property value, housing value survey they did in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So if you're interested in this information, you should mark your calendar now. You can also go to the extension website, which I'll show in a moment, that lists all of the webinars that are coming up. Turn that clicky fan off. So again, Tuesday, September 29th at 7, we will have another webinar that we're planning to do. And on that note, we wanted to share a few more bits of information for all of you that would like to follow this project. And I want to mention another meeting that's coming up next week that if you're interested in our project, you'll certainly be interested in this other one. So to start, we have this obnoxiously long web link here, but you can also just use a search engine to look for our project title. We do have a new project webpage that we will be posting research results on and needs assessment report. So check out that link. You can also read more about our project team, and that will be really where we'll try to, focus all of the outputs that we generate through this project. The other thing is that, like I mentioned, in terms of September 29th, we have offered a webinar, at least one a week since May, and we plan to continue doing that through November. So in August, these webinars will continue to be Fridays at noon. And then starting in September, October, and November, we will take a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Slot, just to make sure folks can join us now that more people are back at work. And in general, if you have any questions about any of the programs that we do through Extension, any of the integrated projects we're working on with research faculty like Dr. Lang, or any of the services that we provide around any of those focus areas, including gardening in particular, you are welcome to write to us or call. We do have someone named Mamie in the office every day here at my office answering the phone and email. So we encourage you to check out those resources, and I'm going to just direct Corey's attention to the Q&A box, which I will also look at here. David, thank you for all of your clarifying questions around community solar. I would, just to address them more broadly, encourage you to look at the Solarize program through the Office of Energy Resources, which I will type here in the chat at RIOER, and also the Rhode Island Renewable Energy Fund. David's asking a question about how community solar is considered in some of those charts that I showed, and that there seems to be a spike in residential rooftop energy in particular. And so I know that answers to those questions will become more clear if you check out some of the policy that's been created around the Solarize program, and also resources available through the Renewable Energy Fund. Let's look here. So Antonia is asking, and Corey, I'd welcome you to weigh in if you know specific resources, but she's asking if there is any research showing that solar arrays increase runoff. And I responded just generally that if commercial scale solar is installed on a previously pervious surface, it will net more runoff just because the panels themselves are impervious. She followed up and asked if there's specific data or research to support that question. So I know I'm happy to follow up after. Corey, you're welcome to weigh in on that as well if you have any specific info.
No, I don't have any better specifics on that. It's more of a natural science question.
Yeah, so Antonia, we're happy to follow up on that. Thank you for the question. Corey, if you can see David's question from 12:46 p.m. He says, in your survey, I know that you need discrete answers for statistics, but are you going to include text boxes to explain why we made the choice? For example, I would not buy a house near a field if the transmission line was near my property to avoid EMF.
Yeah, David, so there definitely will be text boxes for you to insert comments and explanation.
Great.
Yeah, so yes.
Great. Diane, whose name I recognize, she's a great supporter of our webinar series. Thanks for being here. She's asking, did your research include review of the municipal ordinances enacted to date? I would say yes. On the extension side, we've reviewed data that's available through 2018. And I'd also just address my great friend Hannah's question / comment about some of the work that's going on through the Office of Energy Resources. And thank you for the reminder, Hannah, because there is a virtual meeting on Tuesday afternoon with the folks from Synapse, which is a consulting firm that was hired by the Office of Energy Resources to do a number of really interesting studies, one of which is on the amount of land that's actually available for brownfields and basically compromised site development. So that would include gravel pits, parking lots, building rooftops. What am I forgetting? Landfills, brownfields. So they are going to report on studies they did around how much land is actually available for development on compromised sites. Whereas, and then also do a market valuation of the potential for development on those sites. It's a great complement to our project because, as Corey explained, we are looking at non-market valuation for development around kind of the opposite, which is farms and forested open space. And going back to Antonia's question, Hannah's weighing in to say, DEM is part of the approval for all of these projects. So if there is definitely evidence that runoff will increase on a site, DEM will require mitigation of that runoff in order to approve the project. So so that's that. let's see. Peter, who is one of our energy fellows working for the National Grid Innovation Hub, is asking, when siting solar on a site like a brownfield or a capped landfill, is there a different process it must go through for approval, or would housing market studies or choice surveys still apply?
I think part of it is part of it's the same, and part of it there is probably additional compliance. I think that additional process, certainly for brownfield cap landfill, there's additional safety checks that would be needed. But I'm not sure if it would really affect the externalities. We're interested in what happens to folks outside the transaction. So the developer is going to have to do a lot more work and expend a lot more cost to put something on a brownfield or cap landfill. But outside of that transaction are still a lot of people, a lot of residents. And that's what we are really interested in, is folks outside that transaction, how are they impacted?
Diane has another great question that I know you can answer, Corey. Has there been a similar study on the other renewable power source, wind turbines?
Yeah, so actually, there are many studies done on wind turbines. Why wind turbines are so well studied and solar not so well studied is uncertain. But I've done work in Rhode Island. There is similar research done in Massachusetts. There's housing market studies done, Great Plains, massive wind farms. So there has been a lot of, and as well as work in Europe, elsewhere. So many studies on wind. And now we're starting to do some studies on offshore wind, which adds to this debate as well. It's totally understanding what the externalities are to these different renewable options. Molly or Vasu, did you identify any questions that we should get to?
Corey, I think Kate was talking, but she was muted, so she was saying something.
Sure was. Sorry about that. I was saying Andrew Gomes, who's a 2020 Energy Fellow at Rise Engineering, is asking what has been the public opinion for solar development on already developed land, such as large parking areas, train stations, park and rides, etc.
I think generally the impression I get is that most people are in favor of that kind of solar development. Parking lot canopies is a common one where I think a lot of people are in favor of that. Yeah, I think that's strong support.
Yes, and that was part of what we were hoping to uncover in our needs assessment, was just kind of getting the pulse by going to public meetings in areas in communities where there was solar development projects on the agendas, and that seemed to be the voice. And again, kind of knowing that before we started the project, and then ground truthing it during the needs assessment was the justification for doing this. So great question, Andrew. Shiloh is asking, any chance that pollinator scorecard scores will be incorporated into the solar attributes?
Shiloh, that's a good question. I think there are so many aspects of solar siting. Pollinator is one. There are many. And so unfortunately, no, is the answer. And we really had to trim down the attributes that we studied in order to keep the survey tractable. And so that it's a benefit and cost, pros and cons. If you add too many attributes, if you're talking about size, setback, and land use, and pollinator, and this and that, the respondents just can't quite take all that in. And so your results end up being less useful because people are just kind of confused by the question. So instead, we've trimmed down the level of attributes. And again, that happened through the focus groups that we did 6-9 months ago. So unfortunately, no, that's not going to be enough. I agree, it's something that people care about.
So these are great questions. So to answer Josh is asking, will there be survey links to share? And then also, will the presentation or recording be available after this session? So I'll answer the latter. Josh, Molly will put in the chat the link to the Cooperative Extension YouTube page, which is where all of these webinars, including this one, are posted after the fact with closed captioning, so we can make sure folks can access it and access the information clearly. Thank you for that question. Corey, you want to talk a little bit about how the survey links will be distributed and how that works with multiple people and having only one login, et cetera?
Yeah, so if you registered for this webinar, you'll receive an email later today. I don't know exactly when, but Sue's going to send it out. And in that email, you'll receive, it'll say pretty clearly, you know, click on this link to start the survey. And that'll take you directly to the online survey. Is that enough of an answer?
Yeah.
Click in your email, but do check spam folders or promotions folders. But it will come today, and it'll come from URI survey.
So I think if I interpret Josh's question, he may be asking if there's a way to share the link with other people.
So not at this time. We're going to restrict it to folks who registered for this meeting. At a later time, maybe, you know, before we hold a webinar or discussing those results, that might be a great time to share the link with everybody so everybody can get a feel for the survey. But at this time, we're restricting it to just people who came today.
Great. Diane was just commenting about her question about municipal ordinances, and because when she went to, I assume, South Kingstown's council meetings, when they were developing the ordinances, there was a lot of citizen comment when the ordinances were being developed. And what we've seen, and I'm sure many of you know this, when these, depending on the community and depending on the project proposals, folks seem to come out when those projects are being proposed. In certain communities, folks were coming out while the ordinances were being developed and when there were comment periods open. But I think really it depends on the community, and it depends on the process they went through to either adopt the ordinance as it was written at the state level or create their own. So thanks, as always, Diane, for your questions. Corey, this is a good one from David. If we are bringing up wind, wouldn't you make a direct comparison of the farmland to fishing grounds? I'm making the point that farmland does have direct monetary value, as I understand it. So I think this is in terms of offshore winds.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to interpret that. I certainly agree farmland has value, as do fishing grounds. I think, you know, for farmland, it's solar is an interesting proposition because it's a way for farms to make money, right? It's a way for farms to have a reliable revenue stream. But so that's sort of the market-based impact. And then there's a non-market of like, well, maybe some neighboring houses or just residents in the area don't quite like the view as much. So yes, farmland is certainly valuable. And solar is maybe a way to keep it going. Keep some of the land in farming and some of it solar.
So we'll do a couple more questions here. Thank you, everyone, for comments. So our friend Scott Millar from GrowSmart. Hi, Scott. Thanks for being here. is just sharing that DEM has estimated an annual monetary value for carbon sequestration from Rhode Island forests. It would be helpful to incorporate this value into your results.
I agree. That's another non-market value of that land. And I think, yeah, that's definitely part of the equation. And what should, one piece of the information that should come to policymakers when they're thinking about various options, various policies.
Yeah, thank you for that. And our my good friend Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Not so much a question, but a statement she's sharing is that it was called to her attention recently that citing energy on landfills, et cetera, can be considered an extension of the same old in terms of environmental justice, and the fact that minority communities living near these areas bear the brunt of any negative impacts with little input into the siting decisions. And so, Amanda, I would say, just from where I sit with this issue, I think really the purpose, and Corey, please correct me, but the purpose of us disseminating the choice survey as widely as possible and having an N of 3,000 is that we might get some of these voices to weigh in on where the development occurs. I think in order to meet the goals set by the governor, it's gonna, we're gonna have to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't have negative impacts on all different folks in different socioeconomic groups, and also, kind of manage environmental impacts at the same time and consider resident preference. So thank you for that comment. Your comment is just a little bit more proof of how important this issue is to look at, because it affects so many different people at varying socioeconomic levels. It has the potential to affect all different types of existing land uses and ecosystems. And again, we are not doing this project to particularly to say this is where it should happen or not, but rather to provide policymakers with data that shows kind of where folks sit and what they would prefer. And so I think so thank you for that, Amanda. I hope to see you soon. And David, I think we'll end with him because we're a little over time. David's asking, will this research in any way give an indication of how consumers view purchasing a home that has residential solar installed on it? I have heard that rooftop solar adds value, but the panels in the system have a life. How does the market perceive solar in this regard? I'll let you answer that, Corey.
Okay, yeah, there have been, so our research specifically is not about residential rooftop solar. It's about utility scale solar. There has been research that's looked at the value, how people looking for houses value panels on top of the house. There is a premium. Houses sell for more that have panels, and that's a financial, typically it's a financial benefit to have a house with panels on it, and so they do sell for a premium. Okay. That mostly answers your question. And I can point you to that.
Great. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and for being here.
Thank you.
Looking like a good beach day. So we appreciate if you're not here in a work capacity for being here. This is, an issue that we are going to have to tackle together. And we're just hoping that the results of our project can help folks make these decisions so that the decisions reflect the preferences of the people of Rhode Island, and also, respect the different types of land uses. And so I will draw your attention to, we're trying to find the link, and of course it's not easy, but there is a meeting on Tuesday afternoon that is hosted by the Office of Energy Resources. It begins at 1:30 p.m. and ends at 3. It's called Solar Siting Opportunities in Rhode Island. And as I mentioned before, there's a consulting group called Synapse that the Office of Energy Resources contracted with to study the potential for solar development on compromised sites. So the ones we're not talking about. So a few of you asked questions about whether or not we were going to be looking at that. Catherine in particular asked citing locations beyond uncompromised lands. That presentation on this Tuesday, August 18th or 19th, will address that, whatever Tuesday's date is.
It's the 18th.
Okay, August 18th, my best friend's birthday, from 1:30 to 3 online. I would just encourage you all to Google solar siting opportunities, Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources, and you can find the link. It's an open meeting. And, you know, the more input we all get on these issues, I think the stronger we'll be. So we will connect with you offline, Scott, about your question around participants for today. And everyone, thanks again. Thanks to Corey, Vasu, and Molly for your support. I think this went really well, and we hope to see all of you on September 29th. And also we hope to see all of your responses to the choice survey that you'll be sent this afternoon. So thanks for engaging, and stay cool, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.